but there's this illustration, and it's like of a butterfly and a caterpillar, and they're talking to each other. And the caterpillar says, like, oh, you've changed so much. And the butterfly says, we're supposed to. Nobody wants to be put in a box, you know? And I think a lot of times when we get comfortable with somebody and they try something new, it's like, oh, well, you don't like that. Or like, why are you doing that? And it's like, they're experimenting, you know? They're trying to grow and become a better person or just learn new things, you know? So just making sure that you're not putting somebody in a box and like, you know, being okay with them growing.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. We're so excited that you're here for this episode on 4 expectations you should not have for marriage. We're really excited to talk to you guys about this. Man, we've been married this is beginning of May. So I've been married.
Like, let's guess for each other. You've been married.
But you know, right?
I don't.
Okay, how long have I been married?
I want to say like 8 years.
Wow, 7.5.
Okay,
we 8 this fall.
8 this year. Yeah.
Okay, and then for you, oh gosh.
Does it help that it's the same amount of years that I've been working at the ministry?
No,
okay.
That doesn't help at all. Okay. 5?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, I was going to say 4, but it felt too small. So I was like,
yeah, me and Brian are a lot more mature than that.
You're
We're
not
a
4-year marriage. You're a 5-year marriage. What, 5 is like, what is that? Is that the wood? What, you know how like each anniversary there's like a different thing?
No.
Yeah, so for each anniversary there's like an element or something, and so traditionally you give people an anniversary gift using that element. Like I think year 1 is cotton, and then like
why?
I don't know, but then I think year 5 is wood, because my mom got me that charcuterie board for our 5-year anniversary.
Oh my gosh.
5 years is like wood. So
this is so fun.
I'll have to go look it up
right now. Yeah, I'm like, I
have to
look
go look it up, see, and that way you can plan. But anyway, I don't know. It's kind of fun. But anyway, so we have like almost 14 years of marriage behind us combined. Yeah.
Like, so the wisdom is 14 years.
So the wisdom here is roughly 14 years. And basically, I think we just kind of wanted to go over some of these. Whether you're not married yet or newly married, or you've been married for a while, it's easy to build up expectations in your mind of what marriage will be, or even if you're already married, like what my marriage is going to look like or what it is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And those can change and ebb and flow as we grow and we change. And so I think it's important to start off by realizing that we all have expectations, right? It's not like, oh, I'm not going to have expectations. Yeah, you have expectations, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing. If you have an imagination that works, then you have expectations, right? And I think that's okay, because there are some expectations that are good to have, right?
Yeah. I don't want my spouse to cheat on me. That's a good expectation.
That is a healthy expectation to have, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's really what vows are, right? That's one reason why it's so important to have vows. You stand before God, family, and friends and make a vow to this person. It's a very godly thing. And those are, expectations of what you're going to do, right? And we fall short of those all the time. But it's important to realize that we do have expectations and that that's okay.
Yeah.
But there may be some that I know that we both either have had before we were married or maybe even after marriage, like that have kind of gotten us into a little bit of trouble, and we realized, okay, maybe this isn't the right expectation for me to have. And recognizing that is going to lead to a much healthier and ever-flowing marriage, because it's always ebbing and flowing based on, how you grow and how you change and what you think.
I'm pretty sure there's a place in my notes where I wrote ebb and flow. So that's very interesting.
You're ebbing and flowing in this episode today.
We are ebbing together. So if anybody has watched this podcast or listened to this podcast for any length of time, you know that marriage is like one of my favorite things to talk about.
So hot spot
I am so
right
excited
here.
right now. So one of the first expectations that I should not have had in marriage, and I think I definitely still struggle with this from time to time, but it's the expectation that your spouse will like make you happy and make you content, right? Like they will be the reason that you will have joy overflowing and that
Overflowing?
That sounded so spiritual. And that you'll just be like a content person. And I was thinking about what causes this. And I think one of the things is I realized that when I first got married, or not when I first got married, but when I first met Brian, I was like on cloud nine for a few months, like probably longer, at least a year. I can remember me being like, this is the happiest time of my life.
Yeah.
I was actually thinking about like the first time I had come out to Colorado to visit him, because I was living in Florida at the time, and we were driving around and I felt like I was in a snow globe. Like I was used to Florida weather, and like
it was snowy. Right?
Yeah, it was snowing. It was stunning outside, and we were like listening to this album he just showed me, and it wasn't the music and the snow, but it was just like being with him. I remember thinking, this is one of the happiest moments of my life. Like that's how I was so happy.
So sweet.
And those feelings that you have when you first meet somebody, it's like excitement and joy because, you know, you're meeting somebody, you're trying all these new experiences together, and it can be easy to think this is going to last forever, right? So it's like, if I feel this right now in the first month of dating this person, why wouldn't I feel this way on, you know, year 3, year 15, year 20 of marriage?
Right.
And that's not to say that you don't have joy with that person when when time goes by.
Yeah.
But it's just like those initial feelings of excitement, and just like if you've been with somebody for, you know, if you've dated somebody before, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's just like this feeling that you have. That's not going to last forever. But that could be one of the reasons why we have that expectation. And then another expectation is just like movies. Like I watched a lot of rom-coms growing up, and you would think that I wouldn't take those things as life lessons or like reality.
Right.
but they kind of build this idea in your mind, because all of the movies end on the happy note where the people are together. It's like, oh, this is the climax, and then the movie ends. It's like happily ever after, right? Like that's the thing everybody says. And so
Yeah.
there's just reasons why we might have this expectation. But the problem with it, if it wasn't obvious, is that like when we have this expectation on somebody else, that is so much pressure on another person.
Yeah.
And this doesn't even have to be a spouse. Like this could be a friend, this could be a parent, this could be a coworker, right? Like you go to specific people when you've had a really hard day at work, and you like complain to a certain coworker or something, and you think like, oh, they'll have all the answers for me, or they'll make me feel better. And that's just so much pressure to put on somebody. But another thing of it too is the fact that like, it's not just the pressure that you put on somebody else, but it's the fact that we're not thinking about the fact that God is supposed to be the satisfaction in our life. You know, he's supposed to be the one that provides us with joy and with peace and with satisfaction. Like that's what he wants to do for us. And there's a couple verses that point this out. The first one is John 6:35. It says, Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. And then another verse in Psalms 107:9, for he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. I looked up verses about satisfaction, and there are so many verses about God being the one to satisfy us and to bring us, good things and to put good things in our heart. And so it's just good to remember, because I've been in times where I'm struggling, I'm sad, I'm frustrated, and I'm like, oh, well, Brian will fix it. I go to Brian and, it's just too much expectation. And what if he's having a bad day? What if he's tired? And then if he's not fulfilling those needs for me, then I'm like, oh, well, has something gone wrong? Why is it not working? And it's because they were never meant to fill that spot in your life.
Absolutely. And I think, sometimes I think especially in Christian circles, we're so quick to say oh, those feelings don't last. And I think the impression is that you grow less and less happy with your spouse as you are committed. And it's like, no, absolutely not. But feelings are very
Exactly.
shallow. It's kind of like the difference between being happy and having joy, right? or being like feeling okay and having peace, right? Like there's a difference.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, you'll still have those amazing happy moments with that person throughout your life. But in the midst of those moments, you'll also be growing. If it's the right person, right?
Exactly.
And you're pursuing God, then it's
Yeah.
like it's going to grow into a deeper joy, a deeper sense of peace. I mean, I think of like Jeff, and I just think of the friendship that we have. And honestly, like there's not another friend in my life that I would rather be doing life with.
It's true.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's so much deeper.
It's replaced with deeper things. Like I just heard someone mention, like you can be a mile wide and an inch deep.
Yeah.
And I feel like in the beginning, that's what a relationship looks like. It is. It's like a mile wide. It's so much excitement, you know, the butterflies and stuff. But then when you get to know somebody and you grow in that relationship, it's like, this person knows me more than anybody else. I know them more than anybody else. We've been through the most fun moments together, and they've also seen me at my worst, and they've chosen to be with me. And it's like, that just builds such a different joy and a different friendship than you could have ever had in the very beginning.
Yeah. It's kind of like, remember last summer, I tried growing mammoth sunflowers. And I succeeded. And it was really cool. I had like one really big one out front. And when it first pops out of the ground, it's so exciting because you're like, I grew that. I grew that. Like it worked, right? Like to me, that was just so crazy. Living in Colorado, it's so hard to grow stuff. I was like, oh my gosh, it worked. And I was so excited. But, you know, it was about that tall, right? Like really short. And the roots were really short. But over time, as it grew bigger and bigger, the sunflower head started appearing, and it was green, and then it opened, and then it was yellow, and it was huge. It was like bigger than my face. It was crazy. I'll see if I can find a picture, but it was so cool. But that took time, and it took really deep roots, because if it's tall like that, it has to withstand the wind and the storms that come. And it stood, and I never had like a stick or anything holding it up. It was really strong and amazing. But it's almost like saying that first inch of growth is like the most exciting part of your life. And it's like, no, it's exciting, and it is good. And there's an excitement to it that's special for that moment, because you see something like, oh my gosh, I could see a life with this person. I could see this. But don't mistake that for the amazingness that's coming, and the flower and the bloom and the, you know, the roots that are going to grow deep, and you'll be able to have that for your life. It's just such a difference. And the enemy wants you to think that this is like the best that it's going to get, right? And it's all downhill from here. But truly, if you're with the right person and you're pursuing God, I mean, you're just gonna, it's not gonna be maybe those fleeting feelings all the time. But as a person, you're also going to mature and go beyond those and become a much more solid person. And I think that transitions into your marriage as well.
Yeah, that's the perfect point. I don't think I could have thought about a better comparison, but it really is like,
I don't know why I thought of that.
It's perfect. It's like when you see a little sprout come up out of the grass when you plant a seed. It's like
so exciting.
Like that's exactly it. It's like, oh my gosh, look at it. And then like over time, it's like it's still there, but it's blooming now. And now it really brings you joy, like a deeper joy, because it's like it's something you can see and experience all the time.
Absolutely. Okay, so another expectation that you should not have for your marriage is we'll always agree, and disagreeing is bad. I made it a two-parter because I think they go hand in hand. And this is something that Jeff and I have had from the beginning. I mean, if any of you know our story, which I think I've shared in the past, you know, we started off as friends, and we were best friends for about 3 years before we started dating. And there's a whole story behind that. I'll maybe link to it below. But our friendship started off with one thing we loved doing. And I mean, we loved it. It was fun for us. We'd go to Starbucks and we'd have like theological debates.
That sounds amazing.
It's really fun, you know? And I don't know, if you find someone you can enjoy arguing with and enjoys arguing with you back, like that's kind of a good sign, I think, you know, like obviously not arguing about the important things. We were very solid and connected on the important things that we felt would be a foundation for a relationship, obviously. Even though I was not looking for that at the time. But these were things that, you know, at the end of the day, they're not really that big of a deal, but they're interesting, right? And so we had very different opinions on stuff. And to be honest, I think we still do. And I think that's kind of part of it.
I've seen y'all disagree on things before too.
Oh, we disagree all the. Here's the thing: if you can't disagree with your spouse, something's wrong.
Yeah,
Something's
there's
wrong.
Like some sort of fear and intimidation.
There's some sort of fear. you don't feel like you can be yourself, or you don't feel like yourself will be welcome. You should not marry someone like that, because I promise you, life is a lonely life to live if you're connected to someone who you can't be yourself with. You can't have your own opinions, you know?
It's true.
And I think, you know, God puts you with someone who's different than you. You know, Jeff and I are so similar, but we're also so different. You need someone who's good with finances. You need someone who's good with homemaking. You need someone who sees more big picture and someone who's more in the details, right? You need someone who's more spontaneous versus someone who plans things out. You're going to have different spiritual gifts, and they need to both be welcome into the picture. You know, differing opinions are okay, but respect must be mutual. And I think that's kind of what it is if you respect each other at the end of the day, and you respect each other's thoughts and opinions, then you can disagree. And I think sometimes we think that, like, oh, if we disagree in marriage, it's like there are some couples where I feel like it's looked like maybe they disagreed, and someone just is like, oh, no, never mind. You know, and I'm like, that's kind of weird. You know, Jeff and I will disagree. Now we will not, like, fight. We will not disagree with, like, we won't correct each other about, like, relationship stuff in front of other people. That, I think, just makes everyone uncomfortable. Just don't do it. No one wants to see that, okay? It's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But, you know, we'll disagree on stuff. Well, actually, I don't agree. What about this? You know? And I think if you can't have that, then that's when there's a problem with the friendship. Right? And I think when there's a problem with the friendship, now you need to really look and go, what's going on here? Someone doesn't respect someone. There's a problem going on here. And too often, I think marriages fall prey to things like, you know, scandal and affairs and just heartache and all kinds of things, because something happens to the friendship.
Yeah.
And then that gets chipped away slowly. And so you gotta look for that, because you should be able to have different opinions with your friends.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
And it's so true about, like, how when stuff goes wrong and, like, there's maybe affairs that happen, it's related to respect and friendship, because you mentioned, like, the amount of stories I've heard about people who have had affairs, and a lot of times it's in marriage books. It's not like people in my life.
Yeah, Felicia just knows so many people.
Yeah, like a book that I was reading, it was a marriage book, but the person who wrote it was a marriage counselor. And so he would give multiple examples of all these people that he saw come to his office. And so much of the time, it was about, like, oh, well, this person just became such a good friend to me. Like, it was somebody that they felt like they could be themselves with, who respected the character traits that they had. And you mentioned that earlier. I think, like, the problem with people feeling like they don't agree, or that they can't agree healthy, is when they're so afraid that, oh, if I'm myself, if I act like myself, if I give my opinions, they're not going to respect that. And I definitely struggle with that a little bit with Brian in the past, of, like, him being more structured with things, and me being less structured and just, like, kind of
ebb and flowing.
Let's
right?
just go. That, you know, and he's like, well, like, this is how my brain works. Like, I'm sorry, I can't change that. And I had to learn to respect that about him, because there are certain things that, you know, that can't change about the person you're married to, and you need to learn to understand why they think a certain way and why they act a certain way.
That's a really good point. And that's kind of part of the areas that I think it is harder to deal with in marriage, is understanding how the other person thinks and processes, because you would think that would be an easy thing to understand and accept, but I think it's one of the more difficult, because you can understand someone have a different taste in music, right? Or a different taste in movies, or a, you know, morning person, evening person, right? Those things we get and we comprehend.
Yeah.
But to think that someone who's so much like you probably already, because you are going to be similar, could actually think differently than you, could actually process information differently than you. And I promise you're probably with someone who does it differently, because that's just is how it works. It's how it works. I process things very differently than Jeff. And Felicia processes things very differently than Brian. It's just how it works. And I think it's important, because if God's trying to speak to you and lead you as a family, he needs the person who's going to think this way, and he needs the person who's going to see it this way. Because then when you look at it from all these different perspectives, you can come to a more wise decision and see the full picture. But can be so frustrating if you don't realize that, or you don't respect it, because then when the other person starts to think differently or process differently, it could actually almost feel like an attack on the other person. Like,
Yeah.
I know there's been times when like Jeff gets really excited about something, and then I'll come at it with like, okay, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And granted, I am trying to learn to,
That's Brian.
I
Like, just support me.
just support me. I'm like, well, you want our finances, so I've got the budget. But anyway, the thing is though, there is give and take, right? So
Exactly.
I'm learning to be more like, okay, I don't need to plan this out as soon as he says it, right? I need to join him in his excitement. I need to join him in this dreaming phase, right? Because that's important, and it's important for him to feel like I'm there with him, right? So I do try to do that more because my instinct is to start figuring it out. But see, what he doesn't understand is I'm figuring it out because I want this to happen now. Like, if he wants something, there isn't a mountain I wouldn't climb to make it happen. Like, you know what I'm saying? And so me figuring it out means I'm going to make this happen. Like, I'm taking this seriously, but it doesn't look that way, right? It's like, it looks like I'm the party pooper who needs to figure out our budget.
This sounds so much like me and Brian. It's so funny.
Well, and it's true. This is how it happens in couples, that there's always one and then the other. But then Jeff has to realize too, he's kind of growing and realizing that, just like I said, like when I process things, that's me like investing into this idea. That's me, and also I process, like I take time to process, and he'll be like, say something, even if we're in an argument or something, he wants me to say something. I'm like, trust me, you do not want me to say something right now. Let me process this for a moment. And so it can just save you so many like troubles if you just recognize and realize this person probably thinks differently than me, processes differently than me, dreams differently than me. And so it's important to find that out, and then to join them in how they do things, but then bring them along and show them where you're coming from when you're doing things. And then you can really share in that, because it's important that you realize that you're not always going to agree, and that's okay. But that's what brings you to the best decision possible. Because if you were exactly the same, you guys would make the same mistakes over and over again.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so good. I'm just thinking about like me and Brian, and how that has been such a truth of like, when we want to get a goal, like when we're headed towards something, he's like, well, let's plan it. Like that's his way.
Oh, I get so excited.
And he's like, okay, well then let's plan it. And I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm doing, but I'm just probably excited about it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to plan it. He's like, well, we got to go. We got to move forward.
Well, see, if the planners didn't have the dreamers, they would never go beyond their comfort zone.
Exactly.
But if the dreamers didn't have the planners,
they would never go,
they
period.
would never reach their dreams. And so you need both. And the thing is, you do both, like
100%.
You do plan, and I do dream.
Yeah, you do dream.
But it's almost like the way you're hardwired, and God wired you differently because he needs you both to be able to follow his plan for your life. So don't be so afraid of disagreeing. You need to be able to disagree on things, but then just make sure that you're always being respectful and you're bringing each other into your world. Don't assume they understand how you think, because they don't.
No,
like
don't.
You need to verbalize this over and over and over again. What do they say? They say like you have to say the same thing 7 times in 7 different ways for it to sink in. And I think that's probably minimum for marriage talks. Like you need to just be patient with them, and then if you want them to be patient with you, and just realize that that's going to be a journey of figuring out this other person. But then when you respect that and you find it just really, you become like a well-oiled machine, and your life expands so much more.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 12:12 says, the human body has many parts, but the many parts make up one whole body. So it is with the body of Christ. And that scripture goes into all the, we're all many parts, we're all important, right? But I think sometimes we forget that when it comes to marriage. We think, oh, 2 halves make a whole, but why do those 2 halves have to be the same, right? And so I think it's important to remember that just like in the body of Christ, we celebrate our differences and our diversity and our perspectives and, the things we've been through to help shape who we are. We celebrate that. But then in marriage, it's almost like maybe even celebrate it when you're dating. But then when you get married, you're like, no, you need to think like me, right? And we get really controlling of that. And then we think if they don't, something's wrong. And that means our marriage is bad, or there's something wrong in our marriage. And it's absolutely not true. You need that other perspective. You need those differences of opinions to help make you a more well-rounded person in general, but to also get that full perspective of where God is leading you as a couple and as a family.
Yeah, it actually makes me think of like left brain, right brain, but like literally like the brain sides in our mind. It's like
Literal brain halves.
literal brain. Like if you had just two right brains or two left brains, like there's so much that each one does that's different, like the walking or like the creative or, you know, the imagination. There's so much stuff that each side does. And it's like if you lose half of it, there's a lot of things you wouldn't be able to do anymore and process. And it's kind of like that, similar, I guess, in marriage.
Yeah.
It's like that person is the opposite side and they do so much for the body of Christ or just in general to keep your marriage healthy that you need, or you can't really function in the same strength that you could. But also I like there's another side to it too, of when two people are so similar or when they're not so similar, it can be tempting in marriage to like be afraid, start getting afraid to share your opinion, and then you kind of cave and it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, like, because I'm kind of agreeable, and so sometimes I've been like that person that's a little bit afraid to disagree, and I'll kind of just cave, and but then it's you lose the sight of the importance of what you have to say and how you have to think too. So not just like giving them the freedom, but making sure that you're not also kind of getting timid in that area and being afraid to share your heart and stuff. So another way that we can have maybe the wrong expectation in marriage is thinking that when you meet somebody and a lot of times it's when you're pretty young, 20s or 30s, and you meet somebody that they're going to kind of stay the same as they were when you met them. And what I mean by that is there are certain opinions that they might have about topics or, politics or just anything, or, just the way that they do stuff and process. It can be kind of intimidating when people change or when they pick up new hobbies and stuff. And it might be just like a comfort zone thing, but we can get really comfortable with how somebody is. But when you realize that's like, I married Brian when I was 22, I think. And, he was, I don't even know. He was like maybe 30.
Like 35.
I'm like, I don't think he was 30. I met him when I was 27. Regardless, none of this really matters.
No,
but you're like, no.
I don't know, but
I don't know. But either my point is that we were both so young.
I think he was like 28.
That makes sense.
Because it's been 5 years.
Because it's been
right?
5 years.
And they're
33.
34.
34?
They're 34.
Are they?
Wow, so he was like 29 when he got married.
Okay, there we go. Thank you for doing
so
that math.
Old. Oh my gosh.
So when I met him, there were certain things that maybe have changed a little bit in both of us. And one of the examples I thought of was so Brian, at some point when he was a lot younger, like when he was a teenager, he was really into football. But when I met him, he was kind of at a stage where he wasn't really interested anymore. And it was because he was always rooting for Miami Dolphins, and they were doing really bad, consistently for a while. And so he kind of just gave up. But since we got married, he got really back into football again. And so that's kind of a silly, smaller example. But that's one of those things where I was like, oh, he likes football again, and we're going to watch it.
Oh, this is my life now. I'm a Dolphin.
and then for me, because I have to give some blame to myself too. Not blame, it's not negative. But when he met me, I wasn't very political at all. I didn't think about politics and I don't know. I was just very different. And it might be the way that our culture has gone as well. But I have become more opinionated when it comes to certain things in our culture and politics. And I don't think that he was really expecting that, because I don't think that stuff interests him very much. So I'll be talking about it and I can tell this is the life
glass
is draining.
over,
yeah, glass over his face. And so I guess my point is with that is that when we are afraid that something is changing, I think it's because we are so comfortable and we don't want to give up that comfort, you know? We don't want to be willing to get to know that person over again. And I think that's where I wrote ebb and flow.
That's good.
But like, we have to be willing to kind of ebb and flow to how that person, what the person does and the interests that they pick up along the way, and be willing to be open, you know, to be like, oh, well, you know, let me try that with you and stuff like that, because stuff is going to change. And I, you know, wrote down the thing when you say when you get married, it says for better or for worse, for rich or for poor, in sickness and in health. And that's a little different. But what it reminded me is that, like, in the beginning of the marriage, the reason that they do that is to remind you that things will change. Like, you might be poor or you might be rich. And, you know, I don't want to say, oh, you might get sick and whatever, because that's like, you know, we want to believe for health and we want to believe that God is going to bless us. But still, like, there's things that are going to ebb and flow even in your life and external circumstances that you want to make sure that you're caring more about the person and their heart rather than just like maybe, you know, the opinions that they had or the hobbies that you both did at one point when you first met each other that maybe have changed. So I'm not sure if you've seen this illustration before, but there's this illustration and it's like of a butterfly and a caterpillar and they're talking to each other. And the caterpillar says like, oh, you've changed so much. And the butterfly says, we're supposed to. And it kind of reminded me of this topic.
So
yeah. Of like, it again, like another thing that's not just for marriage. It can be with friendships or like, you know, with your parents or whatever. But nobody wants to be put in a box, you know? And I think a lot of times when we get comfortable with somebody and they try something new, it's like, oh, well, you don't like that. Or like, why are you doing that? And it's like, they're experimenting, you know, they're trying to grow and become a better person or just learn new things, you know? So just making sure that you're not putting somebody in a box and like, you know, being okay with them growing, I guess.
Yeah, that is such a beautiful story. But I think for me, I think of too, like, okay, well, what would be the reason for why I would be not liking Jeff changing? And obviously if it's for the worst, you know, you want to help your friend out and talk to them about stuff. But
this is more neutral or positive.
This is yeah, neutral or positive. But when you see that, what would be my reason for it? And I feel like deep down, I know my reason would be fear. It'd be fear of, what if I get left behind, right? What if they change and I don't?
Yep.
You know, or what if they change so much they don't realize that they like me anymore, right? Like, and still getting left behind.
Yeah.
And I think deep down, a lot of our pushback against change, especially in other people, is like fear of being left behind. And so I think in marriage, just kind of realizing we have to get over that. You know, I think we each kind of have to get over that fear of being left behind, because when you make those vows, you don't realize even what you're saying. But later when things get hard, you kind of have to realize, like, I can't punish this person because I'm afraid they might someday leave me. You know?
Yeah.
It's like you have to get beyond that fear, trust God, and realize, if you watched last week's episode, I talked about like being so afraid of getting a dry socket when I had my wisdom teeth surgery that I just rebuked everything and I was in so much fear. And I had to realize that even if it happened, Jesus would still be with me. I had to deal with the fear, you know, and that's how you become fearless, is dealing with the fear, not the issue that you think it is. And so if you find yourself really hesitant for your spouse or for people in your life to change, I would really ask yourself, are you afraid of getting left behind? And if that's the case, really dive into your relationship with God and face that fear, because nobody on this planet is going to be able to make you feel secure enough other than Jesus. And that's really what's going to build a strong marriage, is when you know at the end of the day that Jesus has your back, and then you can have each other's without putting that responsibility on them to make sure that, oh, are you bringing me with you? Are you bringing me with you? Are you bringing me with you? I mean, that's so hard.
Good. That is
to keep up with.
Yeah, for sure. It's like trusting God and then like also trusting them, you know, like they chose to marry you. And I've, you know, reacted in a terrible way before out of insecurity, again, of Brian, you know, like leaving me behind in one sense or another, of, you know, not loving me as much as he says. But at the end of the day, first it's about trusting God, like you said, and then also being like, I need to just trust them with the words that they say to me. Because if I can't trust that, then I'm going to be paranoid about everything. I'm going to be insecure all the time, just making that decision to be like, well, I trusted this person enough to marry them, and now I need that trust to continue on.
Speaking of insecurity, my point, another expectation to not have in marriage is that marriage solves insecurities. Woo!
It did, yeah.
Yeah, it solves them all, right? No, and I've shared a little bit of my testimony as well with this on a previous episode, but my insecurities got so much worse as soon as I got married. And I didn't understand why at first, but now, of course, hindsight, I feel like I do. And marriage is a furnace, right? And it's not a bad thing. This is a good furnace. But when you want pure gold, what you do is you pour the metal into the furnace. And as it heats up, all of the impurities, the things that are not gold, come to the surface. And then what you do is you just take a ladle, scoop it out, and now you have pure gold or pure silver or whatever you're doing. And that's kind of what marriage does, is God uses marriage. One of the ways he uses marriage is to expose some of the things that are, some of those impurities that are deep within our hearts that we may not have even realized were there, but he knew they were there. And he loves us regardless, but he wants to form you into his likeness. And so when we see those things bubble to the surface, we can choose to give them to him. And then when we do, we become more like Christ in our souls. But it's important to realize that marriage, like that phase has to happen first, right? All of a sudden, things will boil to the surface. And for me, it was insecurity. For others, it could be fear. It could be anger. It could be trust issues. It could be, all kinds of things that our lives have taught us, past relationships have taught us, our childhoods taught us. There's all kinds of lies we believe based on our situations and how we grow up and what we believe about ourselves. And God wants to take that away because it's not from him. And so one way that happens is through marriage. And so, again, it's not a painful thing, but it just shouldn't surprise us when those things bubble up. But really, at the end of the day, it's giving it to God and being like, okay, God, I trust you with this. I don't need this to protect myself because you're my protector. I'm going to give it to you.
Yeah, like iron sharpens iron, And I think about that with so many different relationships in life. And I think it would be easiest, right, if all of the relationships we were in were just like the relationships we have with animals, where they can't say anything, they can't challenge
perfect
us.
Relationship right there. Me and my cat.
That's why a lot of people, they're like, oh, I like animals better than people. It's like, well, yeah, because they don't point out those things, and they don't show you the ways in which you get frustrated and stuff like that, But God says, like, iron sharpens iron in that verse that you use. It's like, it's a good thing to bump up with people and, like, those things coming to the surface, because it's what's making us grow.
So really, these are just four of probably many expectations that we can have that we should not have for marriage or intermarriages. But really, I think they can all be boiled down to what you were just saying, and that is trust. And even expectations we haven't talked about, it really comes down to trust. In 1 John 4:18 and 19, it says, "Such love has no fear, because perfect love expels all fear. If we are afraid, it is for fear of punishment, and this shows that we have not fully experienced his perfect love. We love each other because he first loved us." And I really think at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, is the only perfect love can drive out your fear. And Jesus is the only perfect person.
Yeah.
And if we look to our spouse, or really anyone else, like you said, to make us feel secure and take away our fears, they're going to fail us. Just like you're going to fail other people who look to you for that affirmation. Jesus is the only one who can do that. Our minds are super powerful, but they cannot control others. And so many of these expectations have to do with us controlling the other person, right? You will think the way I think. You will make me feel happy. You will do this. And we do that when we're afraid. But, we can choose our own thoughts for ourselves, but we can't control other people. And releasing these expectations that we have over to God is truly what having faith in God is all about. Because we can say we have faith in God all we want, but if we need to control and hold on to these fears and insecurities and expectations because of those, then we're not really trusting that God has our best interests at heart. We're not trusting that God is the one who will have our back and he will get us through. He'll bring us to the right person. Or if we're with that person, he'll bring us through and he'll work on that person just like he's working on us. Having faith in God means releasing these expectations to him and being willing to take the adventure that he chooses to befall before us. So I hope that this episode encouraged you, whether you're single, dating, married, been married for forever. These are all things that I think we all bump up against from time to time. And I know that I have to remind myself often about these things. But I think just to remember it's a journey. You're not ever going to be perfect at this. You're not ever going to have a bad expectation that you need to address, but just kind of being open to, like you were saying, like being open to the change and growth in your own life. And I think that you'll give your spouse the freedom to do that as well. So hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, then be sure and like it and subscribe to the podcast so you can see all of our future episodes that we have coming your way this summer.
And we're also on Instagram and Facebook, so make sure to check us out on there. And until next week, remember
to have courage
and be kind.